So we start off in the first comic with Six, back on the Maw, avoiding getting cleaved in half by one of the chefs, and immediately you might start to wonder when exactly does this comic take place, which we will get to soon. But what ends up happening is Six evades the chef through a vent, but she discovers 5 other kids hiding. They're huddled around a campfire and they've taken refuge here. However, they all turn to notice Six coming in, but one of them exclaims, "You." That's recognition. But how? Has Six already met these kids before? If you've only played the games so far, we actually don't know who these kids are, and as far as I can tell, they don't appear in the main story. That alone suggests something happens to them during the events of the comics. Their absence raises some questions like what happened to them, who exactly are they, and how do their stories connect to Six's. But moving on ahead, as one of the kids is telling her, "Hey, you don't belong here," there are those dark worms encroaching upon her, and one of them just barely catches her. However, one of the kids is able to pull her away, and he walks her over to the group. Now, because it's too dangerous for Six to leave this safe haven, what happens next is the group wants to know how she got here. How did you get to the mall, and what have you seen? What's going on out there? Now, from the looks of it, these guys have been up here, stowed away for quite some time. None of the monsters have found them, so it makes sense that they wouldn't know anything outside of those cold metal walls. Well, the question sends Six back into her memories where she's standing in a city, surrounded by these monstrous adults, all seemingly going about their business, not even noticing that they might be stepping on her. However, before we continue, there are 3 things that I want to address here. The first is this the Pale City from Little Nightmares 2? We see the familiar blue tinge, the rain, but we don't see the TV people, which begs me to wonder, are these the same guests from the Maw? It seems odd that during the second game, we don't even see one of these creatures here in the city. But the third thing is Six herself. She's wearing her yellow raincoat in this flashback. So when exactly does this comic take place? For those who don't know, the chronological order of the series, as far as I know, again correct me if I'm wrong, goes Very Little Nightmares, Little Nightmares 2, then Little Nightmares 1. And where Little Nightmares 3 and the Sounds of Nightmares podcast fit in is still unclear to me at this time of recording. But based on what we can piece together, I believe that this comic takes place after the events of Little Nightmares 2, but before the events of Little Nightmares 1. The biggest indicator here is that Six is already wearing her yellow coat. For anybody who might have missed that detail, in Very Little Nightmares it was originally another girl who wore that coat. She helped Six escape the nest but died at the end, leaving the coat floating in the ocean. Six would leave on a makeshift raft, and later, after being captured by the hunter and rescued by Mono, she reaches the Pale City, where she found the coat again and claimed it for herself. So, why does this take place after Little Nightmares 2? Well, my theory is after Six pulls a Mufasa on Mono and escapes the prison realm, she's left to wander the Pale City alone. But by that point, Mono had already dealt with the Tall Man, and their actions probably slowed or temporarily stopped the signal tower's disrupting broadcast. Admittedly, this part gets a little murky because of the time loop, but it also kind of makes sense that there's a small gap between the cycles before it restarts, where Mono has to spend however many decades in that realm to grow into the Tall Man again before perpetuating the cycle further. But you're probably asking, BHG, why before Little Nightmares 1? And I think it's quite elementary, my dear Watson. Using the powers of deduction, one can ascertain that in both the prequel, the second game, and the comic, Six doesn't have any powers yet. However, by the time we reach the end of the first game, she does. That detail, in conjunction with the timeline of the raincoat, makes this the most logical point where the comic fits into the series. But we don't really see everything in totality until we push on in the story, as Six is trying to find safety in the shadows. But this is where the biggest shadow ends up finding her. This monster with a sack for a face towers over her and jams his finger in her face, causing the other monsters to converge all their attention all at once on poor little Six, who can do nothing but try to cover her ears. The comic immediately picks up with Six back on the mall listening to some boy behind bars urging her to tell him what she remembers. But what ends up happening is we cut forward to a scene where Six is going around the mall and ends up finding a music box which she immediately takes a liking to. Seeing as Six is really into music, she wants to take it for herself, but there's just one issue. The music box was in the blind janitor's room, so he hears it and immediately goes to grab Six, but he loses her just as fast as he found her. You see, Six was smart. She snuck around and went behind him to turn on the TV to distract him. That's when the panel just blips off and we return to the group asking Six again what she remembers. Now, for some reason, there's such a heavy emphasis being placed on getting Six to remember things that she simply can't. But unfortunately, during their conversation, one of the dark worms finds them and slurps one of the kids up, just bam and swallow, gone. Nobody had time to react, to even try and help. They could only disperse. However, they would come back around the fire, and one of the kids would look to Six, who was holding herself, and tell her that sometimes the light is a bad thing, because once you illuminate the darkness, you see what's been watching you from the void, and when Six holds up the light, she sees the guests have found her. This is where a lot of the confusion starts to settle in, because as Six is desperately running from the guests, she ends up in dark waters, helplessly sinking. Deeper and deeper doth she descend into the depths below as her memories sink along with her. And where do they sink to? Into the mask of the lady, who wants to know, what is she hiding? But as we get a closer look at what the lady sees as she consumes Six's memories is that the overwhelming monster from the city with the bag for the face, who was pointing at Six, tied her up and brought her to the maw, which now answers how Six even ended up at the maw after Little Nightmares 2. However, before continuing, I think it's worth highlighting something here. We don't actually know who the narrator is. I'm guessing back there that the lady was the one narrating, asking, what is she hiding, but I don't really know. In the beginning, we think the narrator is just somebody telling the events of everything. But by now, the voice has been speaking to us about Six as if they were a separate entity. I think the one narrating is the lady who is obsessed with knowing whatever it is that Six knows, but it's just a theory. Part of me thinks that she is somehow feeding on Six's memories, but I can't find out exactly what it is that she's looking for. But this could also explain why Six doesn't remember anything, because the lady has been eating her memories. And if we believe that the narrator is the lady, I think it's also revealing what she says here in the very last frame as we're coming up to the maw. For those of you who have already watched my story explained for the Secrets of the Maw DLC, while the boy was in her residence, I noted that it looked like she had portraits of younger versions of herself on her walls. And I also pointed out how the lady was always touching her face like she was mourning the loss of who she used to be and what she used to look like. And right now, she just said that the shadow is always near, waiting for its chance to take us here. She used the word us. So I believe that the lady used to be a kid, who was somebody also taken by the maw, taken to the maw by this monster, where after a time she would then become a monster herself. But who is this monster? He seems different from the other monsters in the Nowhere in that he doesn't exactly want to kill kids, instead he's just capturing them and bringing them here. But picking up back where we left off, the group having settled down after the attack, which by the way, this is another reason why it's confusing, because Six was just on the run. But after that debacle, the kids insist again on trying to get Six to remember what she's seen. In fact, thinking that it's going to jog her memory, one of them decides to share his background story. He starts out by saying that the charm he has was something the children in his village were given to protect them from what is called the North Wind. Except the charm didn't work. Their village was completely decimated. All but he and his sister were killed. Of course, the two of them would have to leave, but they could not find a new home anywhere, and this was likely in part due to the fact that no matter where they went, the North Wind would follow them. And this would go on for quite some time, until the boy decided he would stop running. So, they would find refuge in a barn, but they don't get to stay for too long because almost immediately after arriving there, the North Wind catches up to them. It's huffing and puffing like it's gonna blow the barn house down, asking the boy in specific why he won't come out and play. But the boy, sick and tired of being tired and sick, shakes his fist at the sky angrily, and without an ounce of fear, he screams at the wind, telling it to bugger off. However, from the darkness, a pair of red eyes glow, a crooked voice taunting.
Leave you be? Where's the fun in that?
An eye opens, the voice continuing about how it would lose a bet. But then a demonic crow would come into view, stating how the entity it made a bet with cheated. As a murder of crows come crashing down on the barn, rupturing what little protection the kids had left, the boy would whimper in confusion. "What are you talking about?" he would ask. As the sky tore red, the wind would pity him, In an instant, the crows would turn into skeletons, and in the red dust, the only thing that the siblings could see was the shadow of a monster, mocking him for the futility of his efforts. But the boy, his bravery and resolve breaking like the barn protecting them, picks up a crow skeleton and tosses it at the monster, stating that he won't just give up because he has his sister to protect. Except that's when the wind remarks that it's got something to show him, just so long as he stepped outside. Curious as to what it was, he hesitates forward, asking if this was a trick, and his little sister was begging him not to go outside, yet the boy could not resist. And when he steps out, he crumbles to the ground, heat in his nose, pins in his eyes. He manages to rip out one question from his throat. When? Because when he looks up, he sees the corpse of his sister floating in the air.
Your sister has been mine for a long time now.
The boy, recalling this painful memory, would even remark that the question of when was the least important, as there were so many others. Like, who was this monster standing behind him? This giant who appeared out of nowhere, bulging from the doorframe, looming over him like a drenched shadow, its face like a soaked, sagging cloth that revealed nothing. And it said nothing. Its long coat clung to its body like a second skin, and its hands hung heavy at its sides, radiating a quiet, crushing menace. But its hands did not crush. Instead, it held its hand up to the boy, an offering. But the North Wind saw this and immediately panicked, saying,
No! I was so close! This isn't fair!
It shot its rust-colored wind forward, trying to grab him. But the boy, already knowing the horror of one evil, decided to take his chances with the unknown one, clasping his massive hand. In the blink of an eye, the two were gone, with the wind left behind only to slice the barn in half. The thing in the raincoat won the wager. But the specifics of the bet could be anything, from if the boy would fall to fear and give up, or if the boy would choose to go with the raincoat monster or not. But that is how the boy ended up here with the rest of the kids, safe from harm, so to speak. And you know what? I need to find out what that creature's name is. I keep calling and describing the fuck out of him in every way that I can, but I should just look up his name. Okay, I tried looking him up as the Raincoat Monster, but I ended up getting 6 instead. However, I did scroll around and eventually found out who he was. His name is the Ferryman, or the Candleman, but I didn't read anything else, so I don't spoil anything for myself. Actually, the name itself is pretty revealing and connects to a few things. For an example, Candleman. Throughout the main games, every so often we actually see candles, so I feel like that's a nod to this monster. And the Ferryman reminds me of Charon from from Greek mythos, who would ferry souls across the river Styx. In a way, it makes sense that the Ferryman would be here, transporting souls in a boat. But why kids, and why to the maw? Well, we have to discover more of this nightmare. So the events that follow pick up immediately after 6 acquired the music box from the janitor. She managed to bring it all the way back here to the group, and if you're a bit confused about why they do this disjointed, back and forth storytelling, don't worry, I'm in the same boat with you, but it's also what makes Little Nightmares, well, Little Nightmares. The entire series' success is that fuck. The whole thing is predicated on breadcrumbs being spread out and all over for us to keep wanting more. But what ends up happening is 6 shows her new friends what she found. She opens the music box and inside is this little mirror where you can see nearly everybody is smiling, even 6, who never smiles. However, here you can kind of see the right edge of her lips raising in amusement. But remember, I said almost everyone, because the big kid in the back isn't smiling. We see his one blue eye and his downturned smile, but that's when his seemingly old hands claw onto the music box and he heaves it over his head to throw it against the wall, smashing it to bits as a bewildered 6 races her hands to the side and goes, WTF, bro. And I'm not gonna lie, I'd be mad too. Even one of the other kids asks him why he did that. But all he can do is remember his trauma as he looks down at his hands before he stabs his finger out at the music box and says, You know nothing, Jon Snow. And as the dark worms swirl around them, edging around the fire, afraid to touch the light, Big Boy haunts, saying that they will, as he proceeds to recall the events that led up to his arrival at the Maw. And first off, he hits them with a banger of a quote which adds weight to the tale he's about to tell. He says Courage is always so exciting when you don't believe it will be needed. And I really like that quote. But you see, the reason he leads with this is because one night, he and his crew were having some fun investigating a rumored monster house. Now, while the boy had his fearful reservations in that he actually believed the monsters were real, his buddies would mock him for being scared, with one of the kids boasting about how he doesn't believe in kids' stories. Well, that would be his biggest mistake because he's in one of those kids' stories. With the foolishly brave breaking in, what they would find left them in awe. But suddenly, the candles above them would flame on by themselves. As a result, the boy, half petrified, would make one last suggestion to leave, but they insisted on pushing in anyways, pushing past the point of no return. Discovering these grand mirrors, the kids would look at their reflections and begin hysterically laughing. The boy, with a slightly higher level of survivability, choosing not to look, asks them what they see. But when we see what they see, what's presented to us are these nearly monstrous forms of these children, but they also reflect what the kid's innate wishes are. One wants to be tall, so his reflection is a tall man. And yet, the boy, once again ambivalent, says they probably shouldn't be doing that. So of course, one of the kids mocks him, reminding him that last week he was afraid of the wind, which I think is actually funny, considering the north wind story we just went over. I feel his fear was warranted then, like it is now. So of course, the kids continue looking in the mirror, but all the boy can do is cover his ears as whatever is happening seems to be affecting him in a rather painful way. One kid saw a version of himself built like a pre-patched Arnold Schwarzenegger, broad and strong. Another stared into the glass and saw a perfect duplicate staring back at him. The mirror takes your desires and shows a reflection of you as you wish to see yourself. So for an example, me, I would want to see myself next to my wife because I love my wife, but for these kids, things start to devolve into chaos, with the boy lowering his hands from his eyes to look at his reflection, believing that he should at least try to fit in. However, when he does, his eyes start to glow blue, and when he looks closer, he starts to see something in the mirror. It's got a bow tie, but it has no neck or head. Instead, what we see is what appears to be some orange cloth, maybe. Now, what I want you to remember is that the mirrors show a reflection of the person as they innately want to see themselves, so keep that in mind as we go forward. We also know that in the events leading up to this, the boy has basically kept telling his friend group that, hey, we shouldn't be doing this or going in here because it doesn't make any sense to. We should be fearful of what could happen, only to have his friends belittle him. So, as he's looking in the mirror, his eyes glowing cosmic blue with this thing starting to manifest in the mirror, he says to himself, fear makes more sense. But this is when he would snap to his senses and run from the mirror because of what he saw. And his friends would laugh as she trips on the floor, saying that oh, it's a girl.
Of course you're a girl.
My bad, I didn't know. I thought it was a boy this whole time. But when she looks up, she sees her friends are no longer their normal selves. Instead, they become enamored reflections in the flesh. And they are loving it. They are loving their new forms, but here's one thing. While everybody has their new forms out of the mirror world, the girl doesn't. And that is when, from the mirror, this tentacle shoots out and grabs one of them and pulls them into the mirror world. At the sight of this, everybody begins bolting for the exit. However, it is too late because the tentacles start thrashing out of the mirror dimension trying to grab them all. While they do make it to the hole they used to crawl into the house, they're no longer small enough to fit, except the girl. And so the girl once again narrates in her head, postulating the question of which makes more sense. Is it better to have courage or is it better to have fear? And I think essentially what she's asking is which of these two qualities is going to help you survive. Personally, I think it's a bit of both, but what do you guys think? Moving forward, the group realizes that they need to get back to the mirrors to revert to their normal selves. Except when they get there, the mirror monster immediately grabs the duplicate kid. Like, he grabs his whole body, and he's attached to his other copy, by the way, through his arms. And when the monster viciously picks him up and pulls him into the mirror realm, the kid's arm just rips off, it just tears off, causing them to have to hobble away. And when the girl asks him if he's okay, he's completely incoherent, unable to string even a simple word. And so the tall kid would explain that since his other half was taken, that leaves him as just half a mind, half of a being. However, their next plan would be to try to kill the mirror monster. And knowing that it can teleport through mirrors, the girl runs to try to bait it, with the tall boy ready to smash the mirror once it appears inside of it, hoping that it will effectively kill the monster. So they execute the plan perfectly, things quiet down for a moment, but when the girl goes to check the broken glass on the floor against her friends telling her not to look, she changes. She's like, what's wrong? But her tall friend immediately grabs a cloth and covers her, telling her it's going to be okay. Now, admittedly, this next part is a bit hard to interpret, and I don't know if it was an oversight or on purpose, but what we end up seeing is the duplicates are able to reunite and become whole again, with the tall kid getting absorbed into the mirror and being trapped here. But the girl is looking at the tall kid in the mirror on the other side, saying that they're going to help, that they're going to get him help, I mean. The thing is, she looks normal here, not covered by a cloth. But in the next panel, with the candles still lit in the chandelier above, she's walking away from the mirror in the hunchback form we ultimately see her as, with the duplicates running towards the exit. However, when the girl gets to the exit, the ferryman is there, swinging the door open to meet her. And the girl says it again, fear makes more sense, as she takes the ferryman by the hand and walks off into the dark with him. But before we continue, I wanted to share my theory about the mirror monster. I think the girl was the mirror monster. When we first see it, he's got this orange and what appears to be cloth-like thing where his neck and head should be, and soon we find out it's his tentacle. But because it's orange and the girl is wearing an orange hoodie, I think it could be telling that it's her. But the second thing is that it only appears right when the girl opens her eyes to see her reflection, but before that there was no mirror monster, which leads us into the third thing, where, as I mentioned before, the mirror manifests what you essentially want, so I think the girl wanting to stop being belittled for being afraid would become the monster to instill fear amongst her group. However, when they smashed the mirror monster, and she went to go look at her reflection again, she was broken, and so on the outside world, she ended up becoming the small, feeble little nightmare that she is. The other theory that I have, and again, this doesn't all have to happen at the same time, I could be right about one thing or wrong about the other thing, but I think she might be in the nowhere at this point. Because when we see this frame, everything is huge and she's just really small. Where when they first went in to the monster house, things I believe were just normal sized. And by now, especially after playing Little Nightmares 3, we can probably ascertain that mirrors are a way to more directly travel between the realms. Of course, the ferryman takes her to the maw, still not sure why he takes all of them to the maw. Is that like in his eyes, if he has eyes, the safest place in the nowhere? Or does he have a deal with the lady to keep bringing her kids? Coming back to the campfire, the girl says that she mostly survived, but that's why she ended up smashing the music box. Now, of course, Six, having had enough of them, gets up to leave. Or, and this is a big or, a theory as to why she leaves right now. I think Six had a sixth sense about the lady. Maybe it's because the lady has been trying to get Six for some time now, and Six, probably having something innate sleeping within her stomach, felt a connection to the lady, but what I'm basically trying to say is that the lady knew where they were hiding, and she was coming for them. Because we know for sure that the lady can sense energies or something like that, even through walls. In The Secrets of the Maw DLC, when the boy was on top of the elevator, she looks up at him, so maybe she finds this group hiding in the vents and then turns them into gnomes. Six sensed she was coming, that her position was compromised, and decided to go rest somewhere else. Maybe on a briefcase. But I have a question for you guys. Do you like comics that have words, or comics like the ones on the mobile that have animations and sounds but no words? Because in the first episode of the comics for Little Nightmares 2, we find ourselves in a dark forest, with crows flying off due to a disturbance. Panning down, we see a kid booking it through the night, and they're hiding from someone. A flashlight piercing through the night veil, and heavy breathing draws closer and closer, forcing the little one to stop running and hide behind a tree. Keeping out of sight, they flick a rock to create a distraction. Immediately, the hunter turns around to blast the rock to bits. Taking this opportunity, the child scurries down a hole, crawling and crawling until eventually they come out. But that's when they noticed something. Slowly peeking from around the corner, they looked up, but they weren't looking at the blue moon that haunts you. They were looking at a boy with a paper bag over his head. Their eyes met for a moment. They were almost in awe of each other, until that breathing returned. From behind, the hunter appeared, light and gun in Six's face, captured. And this is really cool because it shows us the events leading up to Little Nightmares 2. After escaping the nest on the raft, Six landed here and was on the run from the hunter, who eventually does capture her and brings her to his house, where she would be stuck until Mono finds her later. Now, what was the hunter going to do with her? I don't know. Perhaps bring her to the maw, since that seems to be everybody's move. But I also wonder if Six was actually trapped, because when Mono finds her, she's just chilling in her room listening to music. So maybe she was going to enjoy the music and not bother trying to leave. We also see her do the same thing when she turns into Monster 6, where she didn't try to leave the dimension. Well, at least it didn't seem like she tried to leave. My own personal headcanon, if Six wants to get out of something, she will. Unless there's music. In that case, she's just gonna stay put. But the next question is, if Mono saw her, then why didn't he help her? Or did he know he couldn't help her right away, so he just opted to wait a little bit and then break her out? But then at the start of Little Nightmares 2, he pops out of the TV, so there's a bit of empty space waiting to be filled there. But moving on to the next episode, in this spooky, green-tinged forest is a boy. With a bandage over his eyes, maybe he's like Daredevil and can see with sound, and a bindle, he comes upon an area in the land with heavy scars on the ground. Something big left scratch marks here. He decides to climb down into a hole, and this is confusing, because either he finds a creature's head down here, still bloodied, and puts it into his bindle, or he's been carrying it this whole time and just took it out right now to put it down. Either way, doesn't make sense. But he decides to climb back up and out of the tunnel, when out of nowhere, these big claws jut out of the walls and floors, and before he knows it, he's surrounded by them, and they are all grabbing onto him, pulling him back and down deeper and deeper into the dirt. The helpless boy can all but try to reach out and grasp at air until darkness and still wakes the deep. No idea if I used that reference properly, but I said it, I'm gonna stick with it. However, gasping for air, the boy jolts awake from his nightmare. He had fallen asleep down in the tunnels, but in a frenzy, he quickly grabbed his bindle and rapidly bolted out of there, scared that his nightmare could become his reality at any second. But as he was catching his breath, he would hear a creature yelping and another one growling. Turning towards the ominous sounds, he walks forward and finds puddles of blood nearby. But when he goes to investigate, a random TV in the woods would turn on. The static buzz grabbed his attention, and that's when a tall figure would start walking from the inside of the TV and towards the screen, pressing its hands against it, slowly coming out. Both scared and intrigued, the boy just watched as the entity would stand tall above him. For a moment, the boy looked like he was about to smile as he began to lift his bandage from his eyes, but the very second he let out a gasp, the TV clipped and the boy disappeared, with only his screams fading into the television. Elsewhere, a girl would be scraping at the floor with her fingernails, trapped in this room, blood dripping from her nose. A light slams on from outside the door where she turns and sees somebody standing there. Sliding a spoon under the door, the girl grabs it and begins to Shawshank Redemption the floor. The girl would dig and dig into the ground until her spoon broke, but for some reason, she would immediately be given another one to work with, and this goes on for God knows how long, but with every spoon that she got, she would keep tallies of how many on the walls. Snaking further into the earth after magnitudes of effort, blood still dripping, she finally digs her way up and breaks out through the floor. A blue and heavenly light pours in, and she rushes to climb up, but it turns out she just dug herself back into her cell. All that desperate effort to go full circle. As she stands amongst her spoons and dirt, staring at the tally marks on her wall, hope is lost. Until something happens. The door just opens. So of course, she steps out and begins walking through the halls, except something was on the ceiling. watching her, something big, crawling towards her. The doctor. And I wonder if this girl was the body who was kept alive by the time that Mono and Six get to the hospital in Little Nightmares 2. However, outside, cutting to the next kid, a boy clings to the edge of a cliff, his small fingers pressing desperately into the ground. A figure steps forward, cold, and deliberately drives its shoe into the boy's hand. His grip breaks, and as his body plummets to the floor below, his tricycle is hurled after him like a final, cruel punctuation until it crashes. But the boy, crying and hurt, gets up to run. Hiding from the other kids, with his back against the wall, clenching onto his lollipop, he swiftly rushes away, with the porcelain students nearly seeing him. In the school, he crawls under desks, patiently waits for a sneak attack, and when another kid comes in, tears in his eyes, he goes in for a lollipop smash. The boy would go around the school, killing and crying. It's a weird combination. But that's when he finds someone he couldn't kill. With no choice but to run, he hides in a locker. But it's no use. He's been found. An imposing figure would tower above him. A low, wet croak echoes throughout the metal vents, and then he sees her. The teacher's neck stretched unnaturally as her upside-down grin peers in, freezing him in place as she pulls the door open, and he's powerless to move. Moving on, looking through a mask, a child would see TV people glued to the static white of a screen. With the crackling and warbling sounds, the child hops down and approaches a cage. But what he finds isn't for the faint of heart. It seems a rat was trapped inside of it, and even though its tiny hands still gripped the iron bars, it was headless. And where its head was, the gate had either been chewed through or somehow bent open, with tiny pools of blood leading somewhere. Following the trail into a dresser, the kid would find another rat. It was lying down unmoving, and when the kid picked it up, it had blood all over its face and body. So maybe this rat ate the other one's head. Taking the rat and heading to the window, the kid was planning on leaving. However, that's when the sounds from the TV stopped. Turning to see what happened, the child would see the TV people, their faceless faces glaring and hands reaching, and so this little ghost would stand there, with the rat unable to leave. Taking us to the next episode, with Mono on his back, looking up at the building about to crash down around him. You know, to be real with you, I can only guess that these comics take place before I know that they take place before the events of Little Nightmares 2, but it's hard to guarantee anything because of how that game starts, with Mono's awakening from the TV in the forest. But the specifics, the who's, what's, where's, when's, and why's, and everything in between, are up in the echoes of Limbo. But what we do know is that there's been a fire, and there are many other kids attempting to get out. They bang on the door, but it's locked and chained. And just when they think they're done for, the sprinklers turn on. Somebody extinguished the raging fires. But they didn't do it to save the kids. They did it so that they could have the kids for themselves. The first kid didn't even notice the large hand creeping down from above him until he was already yelling. One by one, it happened so fast, and Mono couldn't even see where it was coming from. I mean, maybe if he'd taken the paper bag off, which was still intact after being through fire and water, he could see better. But while the other kids were making themselves easy targets, Mono would slip out through another way and find a room with an open window and a TV. But he was too small to simply jump out, and there wasn't enough time to move anything around, so Mono could only climb into the broken TV to hide. Except, just like every child in the nowhere, there would be nowhere he could hide.